Welcome to Gab and Jam, episode 172.
And what are we talking about today?
Today, we're coming to you with a really quick one, tips for recording your song. We get questions all the time about how to record better or how to make things sound better. And this is just our quick tips for that.
Yeah, and so I think depending on how you're recording, I think now it is a lot easier to get good sound quality, especially if you're not using organic sounds.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So meaning that if you're not using like regular instruments,
okay,
then you're using samples, you're using maybe plugins, or I should say virtual instruments.
Okay.
Rather. Then it should be a lot easier to get a good sound.
Okay.
The main thing that you want to make sure of is that you're watching your headroom, so meaning that you're not pumping your levels where your meters are going into the red and that type of thing. So you just want to make sure you're keeping a nice steady sound, meaning that you're keeping it nice and flat under zero.
Okay.
So that's for people who are just using samples, doing that other kind of stuff. I think it becomes a little bit more challenging if you're recording vocals, if you're recording like instruments. So the thing that you want to do, at least I try to think about, is try to get as good a signal as possible. So make sure that the signal sounds the way that you want it to sound.
Okay.
Don't think, okay, I'm going to fix this later.
Right.
If you've recorded something and it doesn't sound the way you want it to sound, and you're saying, okay, I'm going to fix it later, don't do that.
Right. Just you're going to build on. So you're filling in tip number one, which is cut cleanest tracks possible.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So that's the first thing that you want to start off with, is that you want to start off with what you want. I'm not going to say cleanest. I'm just saying start with what you want.
Okay. All right. I like that.
Get that track to sound the way you want it to sound.
Okay.
Now, I'm not talking about things like maybe later you might add some compression, or maybe later you might add like echo and other types of effects.
Okay.
But I'm saying that raw sound, you want that to be what you want it to be.
Okay,
so you don't want to say, oh, wow, this is not quite what I want. I'm thinking if such and such is going to fix it. No. Start with what you want.
Okay.
And then later, especially when you're talking about cutting something like bass, vocals, and the rest of that kind of stuff, you may need compression in order to kind of even things out.
Okay.
But the sound of it, you want to feel like, oh, okay, it sounds good as it is. So that when you're adding things like EQ and all the rest of that kind of stuff, compression, you're just doing that to enhance the sound or to even the sound out.
Okay.
That's all you're looking to do. And usually, a lot of times when you're looking at things like EQ, you're going to be looking at a lot of times taking things away.
Okay.
So meaning that you're going to end up kind of dialing back maybe on your low end. If you add high end, it's going to be a little bit. Okay. You're not going to be doing these sweeping type things, normally.
Okay.
Because you're not looking to repair the sound.
Right,
You're just looking to enhance it. Yeah. So I think that's the first thing, is to start off with, let the raw tracks be what you want.
Okay.
And you should hear in that you should hear, I think, at least to me, remnants of your final mix.
Okay.
Of what you want the song to sound like.
Okay.
So you should kind of get that with whatever is going to be the raw tracks that you're starting off with. So, and I just want to add this one little caveat, and that's why it's a little bit different sometimes when you're talking about cutting with real instruments versus MIDI instruments. Okay. Because if you're doing MIDI instruments, you could always change your sound. So if you're cutting something via MIDI, you can say, okay, let me see what this sounds like with blah 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 blah.
Right.
You can changing stuff, and sometimes even with a real drummer, you can do sound replacement on a real drummer. So you can change out a snare, you can change out a kick, you can do all of these types of things, So the thing that you're looking for in that particular instance is the performance. Okay. So you're trying to say, okay, is this the performance that I want? Is this the feel that I want? Is this the groove that I want? And then you can look to say, okay, once I got that together, now I can go through and I can replace sounds and all the rest of that kind of stuff. And dealing with MIDI and that kind of stuff is always a little bit different because you can quantize. And you can quantize audio too.
Okay.
So, I mean, so sometimes, right, sometimes you might have a clean track and maybe it's a little bit loosey-goosey with respect to tuning, a little bit loosey-goosey with respect to timing. But nowadays you have all kinds of different plugins or even stock types of things like, you know, Logic Pro has Flex Bridge, Flex Audio, where you can just, you know, move all that stuff around. I know things like Pro Tools have like Beat Detective, there's Auto Tune, there's Melodyne. There's all these other types of programs out there that will allow you to fix that stuff. But the one thing that you can't fix if it's an audio track is you can't fix it if it's too hot. Okay. So if
so that's something to keep in
cut
mind.
it way too hot, then you're gonna have an issue with that, right?
It's a distorted signal.
So that's the one thing that you cannot necessarily fix. So you want to make sure that that at least that your level is good. And I always say, drift towards being out of the red, so colder, making the track not as loud as opposed to loud. Okay, so if you have to choose, a little colder than too loud. Okay. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you don't want to go too cold.
Yeah, but you add noise when you boost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So whereas if you are, if you're too cold, I think you can deal with that a little bit better as opposed to being too hot because you cannot repair too hot.
Okay.
And once you clip, you got an issue. So that's
I like that.
So right.
All right. So the first tip is to get as closer to the sound of the track as you want early on, right? And with the raw track.
And then just remember what I said before: you don't want to clip. So you don't want to cut things too high, especially in the digital realm, because digital distortion is not like analog distortion.
Okay.
Digital distortion is not forgiving.
Okay.
It's either good or bad.
Okay.
So you don't want to clip in the digital realm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So our next tip for recording your song, and this relates to vocals, number 2, is sometimes it's helpful to assume a character as you are performing the piece. And to me, this helps give energy to the song, to the mood of the song.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know, if it's funky, maybe you want to take a little Sugarfoot vibe to it.
Yeah, you might want to do that. And not just vocals. I would say if you're a person that's playing multiple instruments, then you're going to want to take a mentality of, you know, like if you're playing guitar and normally you're a drummer, you want to play that guitar track like a guitar player would play it.
Okay, I like
you know, if you're programming drums, you want to, and you want it to sound like a real drummer.
Right.
You want to take on the persona of a real drummer. You want to try to do things that sounds like a real drummer. You want to do, you know, rolls, feels, things like that seem like something that a real drummer would do.
So think like
right. You want to think like a drummer. Same thing with a bass player. You could be a guitar player and you're playing a bass line. You don't want to play that bass line like a guitar player would.
Okay.
Right? Because you could even be doing it on your guitar. So there's so many things where you can pitch down your guitar and make it sound like a bass. But the thing you want to do is you want to think in terms of how would a bass player think. Even if you're playing with a pick, you want to think like a bass player that's playing with a pick and not a guitar player. So you want it to have that bass player line because at the end of the day, you want it to feel like a band.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the same thing. If you're playing keys, what type of key are you, what types of keys are you playing? So meaning that if you're playing piano, then you're thinking more like a keyboardist that's on a piano. If you're playing organ or something like that, now you're thinking more like an organist would do, and so you want to do those type of moves. Same thing if you're playing trumpets, you know, and strings and all the rest of this type of stuff. I mean, sometimes you want to try to stay in the range of where a trumpet would be. The range of where a saxophone would be. You know, the different types of saxophones. So you want to try to stay within that range and do things that are realistic to that instrument. You know, I mean, so sometimes, like, instead of playing, if you're playing it on keyboards, instead of, you know, playing like trumpets all together in one chord, you might want to do them separately.
Okay.
So they sound like separate trumpet players playing each line.
Okay.
So it bring a little bit more of a realistic feel to it. If that's the vibe that you're going for. Again, if that's the vibe that you're looking for, you know, sometimes too, it's like playing a synth. You know, if you're looking for a synthy 80s type thing, that's a different type of feel. So you have to think in terms of, you know, how those synth players played lines. You know, playing keyboard bass is different from playing regular bass.
Oh, yeah.
How does, you know, the keyboard bass and the type of feels that you do are different from the type of feels you might do on a real bass. So that whole thing about assuming character, it could be vocals, your vocals.
Yeah.
Lead vocal has a different attitude.
Yeah, we've talked about that before. That sometimes if the backgrounds are too boisterous, that it competes.
And with,
like
with the lead
fighting,
vocals, right? So sometimes, think in terms of that. How do you want your backgrounds to be? You know, maybe you want them to be that way. That's fine if that's what you're looking for. But, you know, if not, then you have to assume that role of a background singer. Yeah. You know, and then sometimes even your lead line, maybe that's a different type of vibe than what your ad-lib line vocals might have. So, you know, and then the whole way that you might treat them is completely different, meaning how you might treat them in the mix. So all of that is stuff that you want to consider as far as assuming character for the various tracks that you might be cutting.
Oh, I like that. Woo. And our final tip for tips for recording your song is allot enough time. There's nothing worse than rushing through something like you were talking about before, not cutting the types of tracks, them not feeling the way you want them to feel because you were trying to rush and finish the song.
Right, and nowadays, there's no excuse for that. And what I mean by this is that, you know, a long time ago, when we were cutting on tape, you know, if you cut something over and over and over on tape, it would degrade. The sound quality of tape would actually degrade, you know, so if you did like 50, 60, 70 takes or something like that, there's a possibility all those different passes, you might start getting bleed through of stuff that you're recording over. Because that was just the nature of analog tape. So you didn't have that, right? Whereas now you can do 120 takes of stuff.
Yeah, you can.
You know, I mean, there's songs that I'm working on. You know, I might do a vocal passage, and you know, maybe I might do them all, and then I might come back and I'm like, I didn't like that. And nowadays it's like I don't have to get rid of them. I can just record, you know, other takes. You know, and now you can do composites. You can do all kinds of different things. Or you might say, man, I like the feel of that, but that was a little bit pitchy. You know, and you can fix that. So there's all kinds of different things that you can do nowadays. You know, utilize your resources, and then just utilize the fact too that you can always go back to stuff. You know that
if you can't feel like you can do it, you've tried several more takes and it doesn't feel any better, it doesn't sound any better. You can always go back to something that you put to the side earlier.
You can, or I'm just saying, like, you know, if something's bothering you about something that even you put up. You know, and you're like, oh man, I can do that better. Go do it better, then put it back up.
That's what we talked about in one of our other episodes.
So we've done that. So that whole thing about a lot more time is like you have as much time as long as you have breath in your body. You have time. All right,
that's that DIY rockstar possibility. That's what we love about it.
And that's the difference from what it used to be. You know, so don't marry yourself, or I guess chain yourself to old ways of thinking. Embrace the new. And embracing the new means that, you know, perfection is something that you're always kind of striving for in your mind. Meaning that, you know, what gets that song to a point of perfection for you. Right? And so you can always go back at it, always change, you know, always grow, you know, shoot. I mean, that's the other thing, you know, maybe somebody else might even mix something for you or whatever else. But I'm just saying that your thing is just making sure that whatever is going to be the raw materials that make that up, it's the best you in that moment. And so if you feel like after listening to something that you did, you know, 4 weeks ago, that, hey, I can do it better now, go do it better.
I love it.
So.
Woo! All right, so what do you think? What tips did we leave out? What do you do to make sure that your song is the best song that it can be for you at that time, that
Right.
you capture the feeling that you want to capture in that particular song, what do? We'd like to hear it. Drop it in the comments below.
Yeah.
And we want to thank our people who've been coming to listen and who've been purchasing Sugarfit.
Yep.
You know, this is our latest. Faith in Me video is the latest video out.
Yep.
So
Yep.
we appreciate you guys streaming it. It's
Yeah.
all, you know, YouTube. We've shared it on all our socials.
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course, if you would like to buy the album, you
Yeah.
guys have been going here. Bandcamp.com is our main place, but CD Baby. And of course,
all the way around.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
So you can always get it. So again, any streaming service that you want
Yes.
to go ahead and look at, you can just go ahead and put it in. Bourgeoisie Paper Jam, come right up.
Yes.
So hey, no excuse, just go do it. All right.
I love it. If you dig the vibe, be sure to
Subscribe.
We're wishing you love, peace, and
Chicken grease.